Welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, we're going to talk about spacing in your web designs. So this is a technique that I've often used in my own design and development projects. So for clients or side projects and things like that. And it's also something that I've talked to our own designers. So I'm a front-end web developer in my job, and I do some design. So occasionally I actually get to do some of the designs as well, but most of the time I'm just taking designs from our designers and then converting those over into code. And so I've talked with our designers, and sometimes what happens when you grow up using Photoshop or Illustrator is you begin to design to the eye as opposed to a more mathematical type of design. And so sometimes you'll get spacing in between different elements. You know, you get 12 pixels here, and then you get 14 pixels for a similar thing, but it's because you're sort of eyeing it and you're not creating some sort of systematic spacing. And systematic spacing can sometimes be boring, but on the web, you're really you have to think about the fact that this has to go into another medium. So when you're designing for the web, you're not designing for a poster, you're designing for a system of code. So you need to take more of a systematic process, which is why design systems are such a big deal and why people are going in that direction, is because we can create more consistency with our designs by implementing some sort of a design system, whether it's typography only, or it's spacing, or it's the way the elements look. You're doing something, especially as your site grows, that helps the developer to not have to be creating bespoke code all the time. CSS has classes, and those classes are meant so that when you tag something with the class, if you tag 10 different elements with a particular class, you only have to change that class one time. And when you manipulate that class in the CSS, it changes all 10 instances on the page. So if we have to go through and we have to do 100 variations, and they're tiny variations, imperceptible for most people, and you have to do those variations all the time, now that's 10 instances where you have to go and you have to make manipulative changes based on sort of an arbitrary spacing system. Or same with typography. If you have 100 different heading font styles, that's just it's not using the web efficiently. And most people, quite honestly, are not even going to know the difference between all of those different styles. And a web document is a document. It's not a poster. So when we build websites using code, we build them like an academic document. So learning how to write an academic paper will actually help you to understand sort of the basic building blocks of the web. That's the underlying foundation, is that it's a page that has things on it, and you are trying to write this page like you would write an academic paper. That's just the nature of HTML and the hierarchy and the way that a page is crawled, at least currently, by web crawlers and search engines. So the more you adhere to that structure, the closer you adhere to that structure, the better your site's going to do. And when you start to veer off of that structure, now we have to do things in the code to be able to fix the problem. And we have to do things to make it more accessible. And we have to do things to help the website be what it's supposed to be, but we're kind of tricking the browser or the bot into thinking that our website is the way it's supposed to be, and when we've sort of manipulated it to look like a poster, which is cool, but not the main function of the web. So all that to say, let's look at spacing, and this is sort of a spacing technique, like I said, that I've used in my own websites. Let me show you here. I'm in Adobe XD, and this is the original site. You can see here, just very basic, sort of one-page landing page. Here's the mobile versions. So this is actually a site that I just created on my own, just practice doing a project. And then here, side by side, is sort of an explanation on the left of what I was doing on the right and how I created the spacing that I created. So here, Josh is my supervisor, so that's one of our designers, and it's based on, he has we've talked about this. We talked about doing some more systematic type of things in our workflow. So we've settled on 18 pixels as a base font size. The browser will come in at 16 pixels. That's the just default font size for most browsers, but I find that 16 is a little small. Our audience, our user base, tends to skew older, so 45 and up, and so having a font size that's too small just from the base is not a great user experience as you get older. So you want the text to be a little bit larger normally. So starting at 18 pixels is a good base font size for us. And so we have not only typography, but we can do spacing at the same base font size. Now I'm a big fan of Rem, and Rem is the root M. So whenever your base font size is 18, 1 rem is 18 pixels, 2 rem is 36 pixels, 3 rem is 48 pixels. So you just sort of, 45, is that right? 45 pixels. 18, no. 36 plus 18, 46, 54. 54 is 3 rem. And then you have half step rems where you add 9, right? So 18, 27, 36, 45, 54, 63. You know, you get into like 1.5 rem, 2 rem, 2.5 rem, 3 rem, etc. So you can sort of move these half steps pretty easily without having to recalculate and do things like 1.664 rem and stuff like that, which you can get sort of mathematically precise like that. But I'm telling you, from a web developer's point of view, if I have to go off and do 1.222 and then 1.666 and then all these different things, and then there's also 1.5 and there's also 1, you start to overload the ease of being able to maintain the website. So for a designer, create the website, pass it on, you probably never see it again. For a developer, we have to make this thing, and then we have to deal with the ramifications of what we had to put into play. And designers tend to be a little bit picky about, this has to be exactly like this. So if you're going to be picky, at least create a system so that your developer you can be picky at 1 rem, 1.5 rem, 2 rem. You can be picky about the exact dimensions, and it also makes it more sustainable for the developer. So this is an interesting topic because I don't hear a lot of people talk about this. Maybe the developers don't know how to talk about it, and maybe designers just don't know that that's a problem on the development side. I don't know, but I get to do both, and so I see both issues. So when we are looking at our page here, let's see, you can see. So this is the bottom of the page. So if I just created a new artboard, it creates it to the size of this iPhone X or XS or iPhone 11 Pro or whatever. So this is the actual screen size in terms of pixels of what this would be. So once you get past down here, you're starting to scroll the page. So this is what's going to load on page load. So that's what this tells you and indicates here, is that this is the end of the above the fold. And so anything below this, you're going to have to scroll to get to. So just to let you know, if you've never used XD. So this entire section here, and this is another video, but I like to develop in sections, thinking about screen size and what's actually on the screen, as opposed to thinking about page size and what's on the page and how does it flow. Because a lot of times, you know, designers will look back like this and they'll be like, okay, you know, I'm going to get the 1,000-foot view here of how does everything look on the page, when the reality is that the user is only looking at this. That's all that you can see at any given moment on the page. So to me, developing for what's actually in the screen is more important than developing the fullness of the page per se. So, you know, if this is what the user sees on the screen, then how can we develop what's in each section? You know, this would be a whole section. How can we develop what's in each section so that it's easier to consume while it's all on the screen together? So that's a whole other video. But we're looking at these purple, pink, and so we have a full screen header. That's essentially what that would be. It would be a full height, full width header section, hero section, and then between that and our next section, which you see here, you know, you can see this gap here and the gap here. I've not created a random number. So I've gone through each of these, and when you click on this, the height you can see over here of this particular section is 108. Now 108 pixels is 6 rem, so 6 times 18 is 108. Which gives you 6 rem. And whenever I put this spacing into the CSS, I can create a class that's called 6 rem, or I can do large spacing, or, you know, I can give it a class name that's easy to sort of use. So anytime I want to use that large spacing, which maybe I want to use that between all the sections, or I want to put that amount of padding at the top and the bottom of every section, or every particular section. Now all I have to do is go to that section, add that class, and all of a sudden I get a 6 rem, a very consistent 6 rem padding to all of my sections. And I could go through and do that for every individual one, but the more I can systematize it, sort of like when you're using Bootstrap, right? So if you've ever used Bootstrap, you're just sort of adding classes, and those classes are already predetermine what happens with spacing, what happens with columns, what happens with all these things. You're just adding a class. So if I can if I can systematize that a little bit more in my own bespoke designs, that allows me to move more quickly in developing new sections, in developing new elements, in developing new pages, because now I'm not having to go back and refigure out, you know, okay, well this section is like 101 on the top and then, you know, 42 on the bottom. And those don't really correlate with anything. They're just pixel numbers, and there's a million of those, and you can just go wild with them as a designer and just say, oh, well, that looks, you know, I'll just nudge it up a little bit and that looks good. And all of a sudden you're at like 39, which is a number that doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's just 39. But if you can create some ratios and you can create something based off of something else, now you're making something that's easier to design and easier to maintain for your developer. Like, it's easier to write the code. So we come down and now you can see that there's, you know, 216 pixels between your two sections. So this would be some sort of maybe padding I would use in between these two things. And really This here is padding, so that's 108 pixels. That's 108. So you have, 6 rem of padding here and 6 rem of padding here, and then you have maybe a margin or a padding on top of this section, which is another 6 rem top and bottom. Same thing down here. So we create more consistency here. So this is also, this space is 6 rem. And then when we come into our inner spacing, we get the same sort of ratios. So this is 2 rem in between here, which is 36 pixels. So anytime you want to create sort of that medium type of relationship between two items, now I can have this class, or I can manipulate these items 36 pixels. But the beauty of rem is once you, if I went and I changed the base font size to 20, let's say we wanted to go to 20 instead of 18, because I've made everything relative to that root pixel size, now all of the spacing on the page changes. And so now your 6 rem for 20 is 120 pixels each. So your font size is bigger, but also your spacing sort of correlates to that font size being bigger. That may or may not be what you need. That may or may not be what you want. But I'm just telling you, as far as maintainability, being able to do your designs with a more systematic spacing process in place, your developers will thank you. Once you explain to them and you show them, okay, this is like, the spacing is consistent. And you can see here that even though the spacing is consistent, it's not boring. So a design system doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be boring about it. It just means that there's consistency between the design to the code side, and especially when you're thinking about the code. So there's nothing particularly boring here. It's just that when I'm looking at spacing in between items, I'm looking to find out how far away is this item to that item, so that if I take all these and I move them, you can see here this little number that comes up tells me from the bottom of this to the top of this, how far away am I? So I can nudge it to 63. I can move it to anywhere I want to move it, but I keep myself inside of the bounds of those numbers that are in my head. So 18, 27, 45, 36, 45, 54, 63, 72, 81. So these are all my half step increments, and I sort of have, as I build this out, I have those in my head. So I'm looking, okay, is 63 right? Nope, needs a little bit more space. Okay, let's move it down to 72 and see where we get from there. Because once you start moving into like 1.25 and 3.147, you start moving into numbers like that, it becomes very difficult for, as your site grows, to be able to create the sort of consistency that you want. All of a sudden you have like one-off spacing in all these different places, when it's just as easy, instead of 3.14, to just do 3 rem. And I guarantee you that no one is going to know the difference between those two things. And when you bring it to something like that, where you're sort of choosing a half step up or down, you're creating the sort of consistency that a web developer will really appreciate on the back end, because they're going to have to live with this design and developing new pages and things like that out of it all the time. It's also going to simplify your life, because now you are in a design system and you're not having to do everything by eye. You have a consistent layout, you have a consistent flow. Okay, between the sections we need this much space, between buttons and vertical text we need this much space. If the text is this size and the button is this size, we have this much space. So you're creating a more consistent layout all the way through. And you can see that, I've got this 2 rem. So now wherever I need that 2 rem of space, I can apply a class to that particular element, which gives me 2 rem of space, either margin or padding or whatever. As a developer, I've decided that I need it. Maybe I have 2 rem margin, 2 rem padding. I have both of those classes available, and I can manipulate and use that however it's best to use it in the actual CSS. You come down here and you can see 3.5 rem, like I showed you in this example over here. It's 63 pixels in between these, and that gives me some consistency between each of the different sections. And realistically, I've just sort of played around. I built this element out right here with this little media component, and then I just played a little bit with the I did eyeball it, but I eyeballed it to particular numbers. So I looked and I said, does 81 feel right, or does 72, does that feel right? And so I've just sort of played around with it to see, for me, what feels right for the design, what feels right for setting these particular elements apart. And I settled in on 63 as opposed to 60 or 59 or some random number, and then the next one down is 59, and now you've got this weird sort of number that floats around and doesn't mean anything to anybody because it's not attached to anything. It's just 59, and that might be the only place in the entire website where 59 pixels is placed, and that's just not a very helpful type of way of thinking about your CSS. So maybe I'm harping on this too much, but you can see here, once you get into that, you start to get into a pretty limited number of spacing options, and even with that limited number of spacing options, you can see here that there's still balance to the page. There's a lot of consistency. It takes a lot of the guesswork and sort of eye work out of designing. And so if you're in a large scale production environment like we are, where our company prints hundreds of books a year, and we don't have to create sites for every single one of them, but we create a lot of websites that are landing pages or up to 2 or 3 pages. And so there's a lot of churn in our particular design department, and so creating this, even our designers have admitted that it's helped to stabilize and solidify some of the design choices that we're making. But it's sort of like Legos, where all the Lego pieces are kind of the same, they're different colors, but most basic Lego blocks, you get different sizes and things like that, but every single piece is not its own particular size. Like, you don't get to manipulate it like that. So you're working with these things and you think, oh, well, those limitations are not good. I won't be free, and I won't be able to be as creative as I want to be. But you can see here, this is normal web development, web design look to certain things. You have these 2 up elements here and here. You have media components down here, headings, and you're still able to do the things that you need to do. It's just that you're creating a consistency of spacing that not only helps you as a designer, but it's going to greatly help the team that has to actually build and maintain the website once they put it into the code. So if you're a designer and you don't have a lot of experience building things in HTML or CSS, I highly encourage you to do that process, especially if you're working with web developers, is to learn a little bit of HTML, learn a little bit of CSS, learn what it takes to turn your design into a piece of code that works in a browser. Because when you do that and you make that transformation, then you'll begin to see how some of the decisions that you've been making before have caused frustration on the other side. I don't think there's going to be any alleviation of all the frustration between design and development. They're just sort of 2 different worlds, and the person who can walk in both of them is unique, but it doesn't mean that it has to be antagonistic all the time. It's just understanding that choices that you make are going to help on the backside. And the same thing, that there are compromises really that just have to be made, because the vision in the design just can't always be done in the code. And if it can be done, it can't always be done in a way that helps the website. So you can do it, but it doesn't always make the code good. Sometimes you have to hack a lot of stuff together in order to make that happen in the code. And the code is improving all the time, and the languages are improving all the time, but sometimes you just can't express it the right way, in a way that's semantic, in a way that search engines like, and stuff like that. So just know that if you get pushback from developers, that's not possible, or that's going to ruin the code. Try to understand what they're saying, because they're not telling you I'm lazy and I don't want to do that. If they are, you got to find a different person. But most people are not trying to get away from writing code. They want to convert it, but it just may not be possible to do what you want to do unless you make some compromises on the other end. So hopefully this has been good. I shared this with our designers, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and got positive feedback. This is helpful. You should present this to, on your channel. And so I'm trying to present it in the best way that I know how. And there may be some designers who feel like this is too cramped in, this is too systematic or whatever. But if you're a designer in that space, just realize that you are designing for a very limited palette. There are limitations of colors. There are limitations of what we can do as far as layout is concerned. We can't do everything. We can do a lot more now than when I started. When I started, it was like, if you didn't do a table grid and we didn't slice up images that were curves, you couldn't do anything. But now we can do curves. We can do a lot of different stuff that we haven't been able to do before, and make it responsive. So that is growing all the time. But still, this sort of thing is going to remain a problem, because every instance of CSS that you have to write is an instance that you have to maintain. Every line of code that you write is something that has to be maintained. Every line you write when it gets passed on to someone else, is a line of code that has to be understood within the context of the website and maintained. And so it becomes laborious. The simpler the website, the easier it is. But my general rule on things is make it as simple as it can be, as simple as it should be. Not more complex than it should be, not simpler than it should be, but make it as simple as it should be, and not more or less. So that's been a good general rule for me. Are there things I can take away without destroying the integrity of what I'm trying to do or what needs to be done? And then are there things that need to be added in order to get it to the place where we're trying to do the thing that we're trying to do? And then what's the simplest implementation of that that's the easiest to maintain in the future? So those are the sorts of questions that we have as developers and as designers. You're trying to designers are trying to elicit particular emotions. They're getting you to look at a certain place. So I think that those worlds, in fact, I know that they work together very well, but we have to learn how to think like the web. Developers have to learn how to think like a web designer. Designers have to learn to think like a web developer in order to understand this thing that we're building for, because it's not a page. The person you're handing your design to is not a printer. They are not just printing your design to come out exactly like you see it. They are taking it, they're reinterpreting it into another language. And so that becomes a different sort of experience. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know. Sometimes I don't know, because it's I don't have anybody. There's no feedback here. So if you have some feedback on this, I'd love to hear it. Like if you have a differing opinion on whether this is good or right, please let me know. This is how I've done it. It's been very successful. You can see from this design, this is a aesthetically pleasing design. At least I believe it is. And it's also easy to implement on the web. And I'm thinking about both of those things whenever I'm designing for the web. And I think as someone who has to do both, you're trying to make your life and your client's life better on the other side. And thinking about both of these things at the same time will do that. All right, so if you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section below. This has been a real talky heavy episode, but if you haven't subscribed to the channel, click subscribe and then click on the little bell and you'll get notifications of new videos whenever I post them. Usually 1 or 2 a week is what I do. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Hafferkamp, and post more stuff about CSS and HTML and JavaScript, and follow some of the bigger names in the industry and reshare those things. And also, what was I going to say? Oh, if you want to pay it forward, so all my videos are free. So if you want to pay it forward, the easiest way to do that is to just click the thumbs up button. YouTube, the algorithm likes it whenever there's engagement with videos, and clicking the thumbs up is a super easy way for you to help me out if you've gotten some value out of this. And it also helps others out, because then the video, the algorithm sees that the video is helpful to people, and so it begins to share it with more people, so more people can get this information. Also, you can just share it yourself on social media, LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or wherever you post things. And feel free to repost it and to share it with others. I'd be honored to have that happen. And yeah, I think that's it. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.